Hi everyone. Sigismund, the Eternal Crusader by John French. This is a no spoiler book review. So Sigismund is one of the seminal characters of the Horus Heresy and Warhammer 40,000. He's the ultimate noble warrior, duty-filled, stoic and determined. In this book, French explores the background of this champion of humanity. I have to admit I was particularly excited for this one. The Black Templars were my first 40k army, and Sigismund later becomes the first Black Templar in the Warhammer background. So this one was on pre-order for me. I came into it conscious, though, of my fanboy bias kicking in. But it surpassed even my high expectations. I think John French has written some amazing books for Black Library, the Ahriman series being particularly noteworthy. So I was glad a writer with great prestige was chosen for this one. The story, plot and pacing. So the book begins with Sigismund's early days becoming a legionary, but moves to different times from Sigismund's past as the story progresses. We won't talk too much about specifics, as I think some of the cameos are kind of what makes the book interesting. But throughout the memories and interactions, the book explores Sigismund's motives and his opinions on the Great War of the Horus Heresy. And a lot of this is explored in classical Horus Heresy fashion through conversation with a remembrancer, Solomon Voss, one of the chroniclers of the wars. So John French does have a tendency to jump around from scene to scene in different time frames with little explanation, I find, in some of his books. Sometimes I lose track because I'm reading. It's kind of my own fault, I suppose, to an extent. But sometimes I'm reading a lot of different books at once. So I might leave a book for a couple of days and come back to it. And if it suddenly jumps, I'm like, wait, weren't we on a completely different path, a page ago? So it can make it quite hard to keep up with what's happening sometimes. I do think he does it here, but given that the Horus Heresy Primarchs series books, I mean, it's only about 200 pages. It's kind of more fair enough because you have less, the author has less page count to work within. I still think French could do with more kind of signposting when he does move from time to time. Because sometimes I find myself having to reread a previous paragraph to kind of be like, wait, okay, we were there, but now we're dealing with a different event. The book is brilliant, though, because it's very good at going back to why Sigismund develops his kind of worldview, as it were, of the war, and his, stoic sense of duty and honour. The whole book is predicated on the question of, will the war ever end? That kind of pops up here and there. And what Sigismund thinks of this. And it's a relevant one, since Warhammer 40,000 kind of motto of, in the 41st millennium, there is only war. And there's kind of those 10,000 years separating the Horus Heresy and Warhammer 40k. So that kind of question, obviously, quite important. And like I said, yeah, I think the cameo appearances are really cool. It's definitely it could become a fan favourite for that reason. You always want to see your favourite characters in these books. Another kind of plus point is the imagery is fantastic. Some of the descriptions of the Primarchs and the contrasting of the Imperial Fists against the other more brutal, cruel legions really stayed with me. I kept finding myself rereading the imagery at certain points because it was written so well. So really high marks there. And I think that's great for a kind of sci-fi book. It's very evocative. The book interspersed the action well with dialogue, so it didn't feel slow or dull. And I really like the length of the Horus Heresy Primarchs books. I think for some reason the authors seem to make things rattle along at a better pace, whereas I find in some of the Horus Heresy books, often there's a bit of meandering or there's sections that could probably be cut. I think they work much more efficiently at this kind of book length, even though, must have read like a lot of Warhammer books. And there's definitely books where the longer length works, especially, some of my favourites. But there is a good balance in this book of kind of action and dialogue. So for the characters and development, obviously it's centred around Sigismund himself. And it does a great job of looking at that perspective that he has of the war. And the fact that he was somewhat thrust into the role, right? So he's kind of taking on duty that he doesn't necessarily want to have. A bit like Marcus Aurelius. So this exploration of that stoic and dour demeanour of the Imperial Fists could be quite difficult to write. He could be a bit kind of moany about it, and kind of resent his situation, but that's not Sigismund. He's taking up the mantle. And also there's the Imperial Fists aspect where they could be seen as somewhat unemotional. They often use the word stoic to describe them, and it's a kind of a misnomer if you understand stoicism, but the whole idea is that they kind of come across, they're just focused on the duty, not emotion. But I think French navigates that challenge really well, with smartly chosen interchanges with other characters, and the kind of progression that Sigismund sees through the kind of short recountings of prior events to the present. The other characters are interesting and varied, and I think this makes the characterization more engaging, especially because of the contrasts that are made between the different characters. Like that's the hallmark of a good sci-fi book, and good character development, I think. Quite a few different prominent characters pop up. It's likely one that fans of not just the Imperial Fists will enjoy. So readability, it did do the jumping around a bit, but like I said earlier, I don't actually think in a book of this size it's too much of a problem, but I do think it affects the readability. And it is necessary in a short book. I could imagine a new reader finding it quite hard to kind of understand what's going on, but I do think with these Warhammer books, they're kind of for the fans, a lot of them. It's probably not one to start on if you're new to Horus Heresy or 40k. Originality. So John French has also written the Crimson Fist novella, which also features Sigismund. But this one is, it's really built around Sigismund, obviously. And it does stand out as having a kind of clear, almost like philosophical exploration at the centre of the book. But it still masterfully explores that character through the various interactions, which really makes for an interesting and unique read. So for the final score, I'm giving this one a 9 out of 10. It's really strong. It's a great book. It's got fantastic imagery, interesting dialogue. The cameos are brilliant. And it packs it all into 185 pages. That's the number I was looking for earlier. So it hasn't got much room to work with, but it manages to fit it all in, which is why it's such a strong book. I was conscious of my excitement for this. So even being conscious of that, I was thinking, am I rating this too high? But when I actually went through and analysed, imagery, originality, and things like that, I thought it deserves it. So I think this is actually one of the best entries into the Horus Heresy series that I've read in a while. And I think the criticisms I had are kind of nitpicking, to be honest. So it actually is quite close to being a 10, because I don't think there's that many problems I can think of with it. The things like the jumping around, like I said, it kind of makes sense in a smaller book. And because it does so well on imagery, it has enough action in, there's a good balance. 9 out of 10. As usual, like and subscribe. There'll be plenty more Warhammer and Horus Heresy books coming up. I've got a bit of a backlog, if anything, so stay subscribed, and thanks for listening. Cheers.